Thank you, Patrick. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 10th regular meeting of the Walpole Select Board. It's after 7 o'clock, the posted time of our meeting, so I call the meeting to order. As we always do, let's stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So our first order of business tonight is a public hearing on the Comcast cable license. We have a contract renewal that's been in the works for some time now and has been worked through, and we will discuss that. Jim will take us through the highlights of that agreement. We'll then open it up to anyone in the room who wants to offer any opinions on it, and then we'll vote as a board. So Jim, actually, let me ask for a motion to open the public hearing.
Motion to open the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. 5-0-0. We're now in a public hearing. Jim, let me turn it over to you.
Sure. So what you have before you is the Comcast cable license, which is set to expire in June. The proposed license that's in front of you is a 10-year contract, which will begin in June 2023 and end in June 2033. Most of the terms, for the most part, are the same as the last contract. I believe we have a fair contract in front of you. As far as the access and support to our local cable TV, it continues to allow for 5% gross annual revenues to go to Walpole Media Corp. Actually, it comes to the town, then through town meeting, we appropriate to Walpole Media Corp. Which over the years, over the last 10 years, Comcast has provided almost $2.5 million in franchise fee funds to allow Walpole Media Corp to continue to operate. We've also collected over $220,000 in PEG funds, which is about $22,000 a year. It's a fair deal here. This, as far as the capital support, it allows for a $25,000 per year capital support. We've every 2 or 3 years we appropriate something towards Mike Donovan. Most recently, it was the Walpole Media Corp in cooperation with the town engineer and Mike Donovan. We wired up Jarvis Farm, and we wired up the Route 1A fields, ran infrastructure down there that's going to allow for Wi-Fi and security services down there. So we've done a lot of good things with this money over the years. So with that, I'll take any questions the board may have.
Let me open it up to the board. Any questions for Jim?
I'm okay.
I agree with you. I think it's a good contract. I think you and the team did a good job of hammering out the details and keeps us operating with Walpole Media, which is good. And first step in a two-step process of renewing our cable contracts. So with that said, I'll now open it up. Since we're in a public hearing, I'll open it up to anybody who would like to address the board. Anybody like to talk on the contract? Okay, being none, I'd ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Seconded.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
5-0-0. We're now out of the public hearing. Ally, could I have a motion on the contract, please?
Motion to sign the Comcast cable television renewal license effective June 9th, 2023 for a 10-year term.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
5-0-0. Thank you. Next up, we have a...
Jim, excuse me, there's a secondary motion for that, for an extension?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ally. I'm just, the next thing we have is an extension of the agreement between the town of Walpole and Walpole Media Corp. So Jim, if you just briefly touch
Just a
on
brief
that.
overview.
And Tamara or Jean, I see you guys here. If you want to talk to it, that'd be great too. Okay?
So just a quick Reader's Digest version. Walpole Cable TV formed in 1984 with the purpose of providing public education and governmental cable access to the people of Walpole. Back in 2015, we worked collaboratively with Walpole Cable TV, which is now Walpole Media Corp, to sign an agreement that formed the new Walpole Media Corp, which allows us to take in the funds, then appropriate it through the town meeting process. It's been a real solid, great agreement. I think Walpole Media Corp has been doing a great job. They're now in the high school working collaboratively with Principal Imbush and his staff. So it's really worked out well for the most part. So part of the agreement that was signed in 2015 is 3 options of 3-year renewals. So this will be the second 3-year option. So with it expired just a few days ago. So I'd recommend favorable action on this one. And anything to add?
Hey, Gene.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Jean Kenny, current president of the Walpole Media Corporation. And we reviewed and discussed the contract, and we agree. We've been very pleased these last several years with what Walpole Media Corporation has been able to do in collaboration with the town. And we're very happy to ask that this contract be renewed.
Thank you, Gene.
Thanks.
Any questions from the board for Jim or for Gene? Okay, Ally?
Motion to sign the extension agreement between the Town of Walpole and Walpole Media Corp. for an additional 3-year term.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. Thank you. Okay, next order of business, we've got Pat DeShane here, who's our Director of Community and Economic Development. And Pat's going to talk us through the MBTA zoning update.
Yes.
And welcome, Pat. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, sure.
So I believe the last time we talked regarding the MBTA zoning had to do with the draft guidelines that DHED put out last winter. So since that time, the final guidelines have been released as of August 10th. Some of the highlights, I guess, that I kind of noted in my memo to the board had to deal with changes to the specific categories for the 175 communities that would be designated as applicable to this requirement. We're now going from a bus community to a commuter rail community. Some of the information is pretty consistent in terms of what our minimum build-out potential is. The last page of the memo that I provided to you kind of gives a brief overview of kind of what our 2020 census numbers are, our minimum build-out capacity is, the minimum land area requirement, and all what this has to do really is the state took the action to try to incentivize the creation and facilitation of housing, specifically within areas of transit. Walpole, or I guess how this would relate to Walpole, our kind of main node, so to speak, would be the MBTA commuter rail station. So going forward right now, I'm taking a look at what our existing zoning is and looking at opportunities of where changes could be made to be in compliance with these guidelines. Right now, for this coming fiscal year, there's a action plan that is needed to be submitted by January 31st of 2023. The action plan is very simple. It's really just kind of a loose timeline of what you're hoping to accomplish within the between now, so to speak, until when you need to meet compliance. Compliance for a commuter rail community such as Walpole would be December 31st of 2024. So that's quite a ways away. But in the meantime, I was able to pursue a technical assistance grant through Mass Housing Partnership. Fortunate enough, we were awarded that grant. So one of the actions that I'm going to be moving forward with is, beyond completing the action plan, I'm going to be working with a consultant to look at our existing zoning, come up with possible solutions through different zoning amendment measures, as well as taking a look and better understanding of, it's called the compliance model that the state set up. So in order for communities to apply with the state to say, hey, we already met compliance, or here are our proposed changes, after they've been voted on at town meeting, or whatever system of government the community has. The compliance model is really, to say it simply, it's a built-out Excel file with a mapping component. So in order to kind of comply with the state, we need to be able to identify certain things as applicable dimensional regulations, what are existing use constraints in terms of parking, in terms of height, in terms of if it's true multifamily by right, and then be able to properly map the district and identify what is a developable parcel, what's not a developable parcel. So there's a lot of moving components that go into it in terms of not just saying like, yep, multifamily by right. You have to be able to kind of really define what and where that is, and if it's applicable, and if it can be built. So it's a lot to kind of unpack at once, but if anyone has any specific questions or thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, so thank you for,
Yep.
for being here and for that.
Yep.
Your memo was very helpful
Okay.
coming into this. I guess the questions that I've got is, I'm just curious, now that we have, I think, a better sense of what compliance is going to look like, I'm wondering if you have a point of view on how close to being compliant we actually are, and where some of the areas where we know we're going to have to put some work into to become compliant are in the next 2 years.
So, I guess if I'm looking from like a land use standpoint, and how it relates is, we have to define an area that's within a half mile of a transit station, as defined through the guidelines. Has to compose at least 50 acres. It needs to provide multifamily or multi-family residential by right. So right now, within the central business district, and for anyone familiar, that's predominantly the downtown. The central business district is the zoning district border of how that's defined. That area was effectively mixed use by right, with a certain provision that residential dwellings are allowed up to 3.5 times the percent of the gross floor area for commercial use. So it's not truly a multifamily by right. There's a commercial component that's needed with the residential component within our current central business district. So while that's still something that is allowable under the guidelines do want you to further specify that true multifamily residential is allowed by right, and there's not an additional component of needing commercial. So I think we're in a position where we're unlike some other towns that may be what's defined as like an adjacent community or a small town adjacent community. Some of our neighbors are in tougher positions because they don't have a true downtown or a commercial rail station that defines their downtown. Walpole's pretty well situated in the sense that there is already kind of a zoning district that has a higher density residential use that is within a commercial, I shouldn't say commercial, a MBTA station. So I think thinking of it that way, we have a pretty well-defined area to kind of start with and to focus on. But in terms of calculating what's called like your minimum build out. So for ours, the way it's written is it's I believe 15% of our total housing stock, which our total housing stock under the 2020 census is 10,042 units. So we need to define an area from a zoning standpoint that could be built out to accommodate, I think it's around a little over 1,500 units. So it's not a mandate to build those. It's really from like when you look at it in terms of zoning, it's if you're looking at the density of that defined area, if you were going to completely develop that area, that would be the minimum amount needed to meet compliance with the bylaws. So it's not always, I guess when you look at maximum build out or minimum build out, it's not always set in stone that that's going to be happening. We have an area, downtown itself is, we have Union West, Liberty Station, the Gilmore's project potentially. Those are already, sites that are already built, or they are going to, or possibly could be built. So those already built out sites, they don't really factor into the sense of like they take away dwelling units. So like, if we have 300 units total between both those sites, then we get to remove that from the 1,500. Zoning just wants to show that if you were to clear everything, that would be your minimum amount that you could build under the new regulation. It's not always 100% feasible, but I know it's kind of off on a tangent. But any questions on that?
Well, I guess that's kind of where I'm going at, because I see the minimum of 1506.
Yeah.
You get the minimum land area, the 50 acres, the developable area, station area, 638 acres. And I'm trying to get into my head what that's gonna then mean in the next 2 years in terms of the steps we need to take to be compliant. And I'm not able to easily get there, and maybe that's because we haven't really developed the action plan yet.
Yeah.
And maybe I need to wait for that, but I'm trying to just get a better sense of what are the things that we're gonna need to do in the next 2 years.
So if I'm looking at it, I would probably look at it from a zone, like in terms of zoning amendments that are needed to meet compliance. And so you have what's your underlying zoning, so what's existing on the ground currently. And a lot of towns, sometimes when they want to incentivize greater density for a certain location, what they would do is like an overlay zoning district. That's my initial first thought, because with a zoning overlay, you retain the existing zoning, the existing underlying zoning. You could possibly go about it as an overlay zoning district, which you don't have to worry about untangling anything that's already there existing. You can just have that new additional higher density use within that defined area. And zoning overlays are are helpful for the sense that if it's a successful overlay, it's a successful zoning product, you can utilize that in different sections of town if you wanted to. Whether you wanted to move that to a different developable station area. So that's another thing that's been changed in terms of what they call as developable station areas. So Walpole has an extensive amount that's factoring in different public transit locations. So in theory, you could do an overlay for the downtown and focus on covering the downtown for that higher density use. You could transfer that to a different location. And all this is really just kind of like off the top of my head. This is kind of my first initial thought on this, is that an overlay is probably might be the most realistic way to go about making any proposed zoning change. But it's still, I think, I'm fortunate enough to at least have the game plan of working with a consultant through the technical assistance grant that we received, and be able to kind of pick their brain and be able and come away with something that's hopefully compatible for the town, while also, making sure that we are compliant, or at least putting the framework in place to reach compliance.
Yeah, and sort of the obvious question is,
Yeah.
as we go through that, are there any areas that we're at risk of not being in compliance, and what are the implications of that? And
So-
the sooner we identify that, the better I'll feel, at least.
Yeah, I mean, initially, my thought is just we don't allow for true multifamily residential development by right. We have the caveat that it needs to have the commercial component with it within, if I'm just looking at the central business district as that location. So that's kind of like the big, easy to see target.
Yeah.
In terms of square footage, not so square footage, in terms of acreage requirement, in terms of proximity to a transit station, and again, this is just me looking at our GIS, I think we are fine there if we focus as the central business district as that, primary location. It meets the requirements in terms of acreage, it meets the requirements in terms of location to a commuter rail station. So physically, I think we have a much more better defined area than maybe some other towns, so I think we have a good stepping stone to kind of reach that compliance.
So just to piggyback on
Yep.
your question, Jim, what happens if we don't adopt this? I've attended a couple of these seminars with
Yep.
Patrick here. Basically, it's a zoning bylaw. We'd still have to go to town meeting to adopt it. So until 2/3 of town meeting passes it, we're not in compliance. What can they hold over our head? It's basically funding. It has to do with MassWorks infrastructure grants. The last MassWorks grant we got was the $2.5 million for the Siemens project to improve that. We don't get a whole lot of MassWorks grants. In the Housing Choice Incentive grants, which I can't remember the last time we got one, but they're holding money over your head if you fail to adopt this. I'm not completely on board with this, Pat. Didn't we get some funds to hire a consultant to help us out, for some grant funds or something, right? I think of something else.
For
Figure
this?
out- To navigate through this?
Yeah, that's why I just mentioned the Mass
So-
Housing Partnership Technical Assistance.
We're gonna hire someone to help us navigate through this, and until Patrick's comfortable, I need to be comfortable before we present this all. This is part of the requirements that he update the board The state's mandating
Yeah.
that Patrick come before you and
Okay.
update you.
So I'm a little premature with my questions, apparently,
Yeah.
which is fine. But because what's rumbling around in the back of my head is the other discussion we've been having with the MBTA around the station itself and the station improvements. And how does this intersect with that?
To the best of my knowledge, not at all.
But is it possible that not being compliant with this would stop us or slow us down from,
I don't think so.
you don't?
This,
Okay.
I
this
think it's-
grant is administered through the DHCD, right?
So DHCD is the entity that formulated the guidelines.
That's through them.
Okay.
MassDOT's completely separate.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. All right, let me open it up to the rest of the board. Other questions or comments for Patrick? Ben? Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. I think the explanation you gave in the memo here is very helpful. And I would just tend to agree with you, and without repeating kind of some of the minutiae you got into there, you know, a lot of towns around us, particularly more rural towns, they might have single family, you know, right up to within, I don't know, say for the purpose of the discussion, 1,000 feet of their rail station. Well, they're going to have a lot of trouble with this, right? Because they have to overturn or change single-family dwelling zoning codes right within that area. So to Patrick's point, we have this ready-made area in the CBD that's should be very simple for us, and nothing is very simple necessarily, but it can be. And once we calculate some of the minimum land areas and some of that, the units that can be supported by that area, perhaps the CBD does meet that, and it would just be an overlay. That would be the simplest case conceivably.
Yeah.
But I would also then just kind of caution all of us and everyone, and hopefully any member of town meeting that might happen across this or listen, you know, there's only, 3 town meetings between now and the deadline. So we do have time, 24, so 4 town meetings, but we're closing the warrant, so 3 town meetings.
Yep.
So it seems like a lot of time. It's 2 calendar years, but in reality, it's you know, that's kind of tight, to be honest. We got to formulate it. You'll get with the consultants and just come up with something, but we definitely need to move on it so that we're prepared.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I'm very excited to have gotten the grant and be able to
Yeah.
at least get us going and give us a good idea, working with some good planners. So the grant itself is through Mass Housing Partnership. They assigned the consultant, so the consultant that was already assigned to us was the Barrett Planning Group, which we're already working with on
Right.
the master plan update.
Right.
So their familiarity of the town itself is actually, it's helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think the other, you know, I know some of this feels like it's kind of being foisted upon us by the state, and to some extent it is, but I look on it a little bit as a opportunity as well to understand a little bit more about our zoning code, you know, what we do allow in the CBD, what opportunities are there, what land isn't developed, because there's a lot of land downtown that we're not utilizing efficiently, right? And we have the opportunity, I think, there to do, to identify that and then work with a consultant to be able to come up with better ideas for how to use that space. So I think that's a positive, to be honest. So, thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Any other questions or comments? Glenn?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. I mean, I think there's a lot more to come. We need to come up with our action plan. We have the technical assistance, so there'll be more time to get into the details. I think generally speaking, identifying the central business district is the right thing to do. We said we need 50 acres to meet the compliance, and the CBD is 66 acres, so it certainly is in the realm of the right size. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I mean, that's just, my initial thought is we do have a pretty good framework established, or a pretty good defined location where this makes sense. We're under 2 years away from when we need to be compliant.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of time to work on something that is right for the town,
Yeah.
and be able in a position to have both public hearings on it, but workshops on it, and be able to really kind of vet whatever proposal
Yeah, and to
comes
your-
out of it.
To your point, I mean, so it's going to be a multifamily by right, so we want to make sure we do protect the mixed-use aspect of what's in the CBD right now. So an overlay would need to take that into account, and we'll make sure that we do that as part of the plan, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And my other comment is, just real quick, and nobody mentioned the affordable aspect. I know that affordable housing is allowed to be a component, but there are restrictions, whether it's 10% or a maximum of 20%. but there are restrictions that come with the affordable, and I've always said that, you know, in order to kind of keep some of these big affordable 40B projects out of South Walpole and East
Yeah.
Walpole, that downtown is probably a better place to gain some traction on affordability. So I think that should be part of the conversation too. So keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thanks, Glenn. Anyone else? No. Good, okay. Good update. Look forward to future updates. Let us know
Absolutely.
what you need from us, okay? Okay,
I
on
got it.
to our next item, which is discussion of possible vote on spring warrant article, which is to deal with the zoning bylaw amendment around accessory in-law suite zoning. Patrick, I think you're going to start us off on this. I think that there may be others who are going to participate in the dialogue as well, but
Absolutely.
why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, so to kind of provide a little bit of history to this, back last spring, to myself and the building commissioner, we were talking about looking at our zoning, thinking about changes or thinking about certain things that would be helpful to add clarity to further expand on and be able to just kind of take a stab at proposing some zoning amendments. The changes to the in-law came about just from our thinking of, this is an item that is constantly before the zoning board of appeals, who is the special permit granting authority on this matter. So when something is frequently before a board in that situation, you're able to notice trends and patterns, and it's one of those things where you notice that what's missing or what's something that comes up that's not properly defined or could be expanded on through an amendment. So that's what kind of started the thought process of looking at our existing zoning and thinking of potential changes. Through the process, I believe I had met with the planning board in July to initially have the initial conversation on it, received some feedback there. Some of that feedback also suggested talking to the zoning board of appeals as a special permit granting authority for their feedback. I continued that with the planning board in December. Similar feedback, and I was able to kind of go back to the zoning board of appeals, and a lot of this is recommendations and suggested language that came from the zoning board based upon their working knowledge and experience of dealing with this bylaw. I was at one of the zoning board meetings where the zoning board felt that that this bylaw itself would be better to be sponsored by the select board rather than the planning board. I'm not totally used to that concept. I come from a different background where most zoning I've usually gone through the planning board entirely for that process. But I understood the logic and the rationale behind it, and obviously taking the zoning board's vote into consideration, that's where this memo came to the board for possible discussion and sponsorship of these proposed amendments. I guess from there, I'd be happy to take any
Yeah, so
suggested
what
questions.
I'd like to do is this.
Yep.
I don't have any problem with the logic of why it's in front of us if the planning board doesn't want to sponsor it, and yet it's something we feel should be on the warrant and sponsored by someone. It's not unreasonable to have the select board sponsor, especially since the zoning board is an appointed board by the select board. So I do think having the zoning board sponsored is the wrong thing, because they're a judicial board and shouldn't be making the laws that they're going to be judging. So
And they can't sponsor it
yeah,
anyway.
So I think that having it come to us is fine, but I also want to make sure that since it's not our language, I think we need to actually step through it and have you tell us the changes that you're making. And the question that's in my mind is always, when we talk about zoning, is what's the problem we're trying to solve? So why is it that we feel the need to make modifications to existing zoning, and what's the outcome we're trying to achieve? So if you could literally step us
Yeah.
through, and I know this might be a little tedious for the board, but for at least for me, I would like to actually literally go through each one of the changes, since you're asking us to sponsor it, and make sure that we're in agreement with what's being requested before we agree to sponsor it. Okay?
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. As part of the process, should we make comments from the board as we go, or you want us to wait?
I think
till
we
the-
should do it as we go, yeah. So let's just step right through it.
So I guess starting off, it would be section 5B-2A in purpose. So in the existing bylaw, there was no defined purpose section. So the purpose of providing an opportunity for family members who live in close proximity but separate from other family members to remain within the family environment. 2, provide for the health and safety concerns of elders or disabled family members. And 3, protect residential stability and single-family character of neighborhoods. Typically, that's pretty kind of on the nose of what an in-law unit would be defined as, or would be the purpose of an in-law unit. So that's where that section came from. It wasn't within the existing bylaw, and that was the suggestion to provide clarity to that.
So I think that's fine. Any questions from the board on that particular suggested change? Ellen?
Well, the only thing I thought of when reading through this is one of the issues individuals looking for like au pair suites and building on, because right here it's specifying family members, disabled family members. Is that one of the concerns that is being brought up of why parameters and a more clear definition is wanted?
Likely, yes. I mean, that's being that it's an in-law suite and not an accessory dwelling unit. I think that was part of that nature of wanting to define it as what an in-law suite would be, rather than seeing it as an accessory dwelling unit without that kinship requirement.
Sorry, to Ally's question, would an au pair be allowed under this bylaw since they are not a blood relation?
An au pair is not a blood relation.
A family
Oh,
caregiver?
no, yeah.
I'm sorry, that might be a question for Jim, but that is something that...
No, so the whole premise of an in-law is when you go for an in-law, it's your immediate family. You're asking for a special permit to allow them to live with you.
Got it.
An au pair can live with you, that's fine. You could have a basement fitted out for them. They need standard. You could have a bedroom and living room down there for them, their own TV room if you want.
Okay.
But it's that threshold of where you go into a kitchen and make it a separate living area. Now you've basically turned your single-family dwelling into basically with an apartment attached to it.
It makes sense.
So an au pair doesn't need a full suite
Okay.
if they're...
I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Anything else on that change?
Okay.
Thanks, Pat.
The next proposed change was further defining the in-law suite definition. Specifically, just the existing definition had a separate dwelling unit located in a single-family dwelling as an accessory and subordinate use to the residential use of the property, provided that such dwelling unit, or such separate dwelling unit has been established pursuant to the provisions of this section. The one change you'll notice is adding with a kitchen or kitchenette. That was kind of the clear, as this bylaw is taken into consideration, that kitchen is really kind of the threshold that goes from would be, an addition to a home and what would be defined as a separate dwelling unit. So making sure that was included within there was a suggestion.
And so that specifies kitchen and kitchenette, as you just said.
Yep.
But it doesn't specify many other things, like a bathroom.
So you can have a bathroom if you want to have an addition to include a bathroom, you can allow to do that by right. So it's really the kitchen that, depending how it's structured, would be deemed a in-law suite. And so, Jim, I don't know if that's anything, if I'm missing anything there in terms of how you would define the in-law suite by having that separate.
No, so
Kitchen.
again,
Yeah.
as Patrick said, the kitchen's what triggers it, because you can, as a homeowner, single family, add on 6 bedrooms to your house, a family room, a TV room, extra bathrooms. That's all allowed as of right. By bringing the kitchenette or the kitchen into a separate area of your house, it opens up the possibility of you separating that again, making a multi-family. And the kitchen is where the threshold is, because under building code, which we try and back up the zoning on, is once you make, for a living house, you need sleeping area, bathroom area, laundry, and a kitchen. So if you take one of those criteria out of it, it's not a separate living space. So that's why the kitchenette comes into play.
Gotcha. Okay.
I have a quick question. Just as I've talked to residents who have tried to go through this in-law suite or not want to trigger this, when you say kitchen, what specifically? So as soon as you add a stove, are we talking if someone added a sink and a microwave, are they okay? So what kind of sets that parameter?
So the 2 criteria is either what's called a kitchenette or a wet bar. So a wet bar, which people sometimes have in their basement, is just they could have a fridge and a sink, but no cooking appliance. And the always is that grey area of is a microwave cooking appliance. If you're in college, it's 3-star cuisine right there. If you're at home, it's not. but that's counted as a cooking appliance. So once you start adding a cooktop, a stove, or a microwave, now you've made it a full-blown kitchen. If you just keep it as a sink and a small fridge or something, that's seen as just a wet bar.
Okay.
Anything else?
I don't have a problem with that part.
Okay.
Next is section C, dealing with ownership requirements. The only addition to this was under 7. Under no circumstances shall the accessory suite be utilized as a rentable dwelling unit. And so that's, again, to further define that this is an in-law suite, this isn't an accessory dwelling unit, and it's just trying to make it as black and white as possible.
So one of the questions I've got on this one is, see, you have a situation where somebody creates a separate living space for their mother who is in her later years and is requiring care. And the time comes when the mother passes on, and meanwhile you've made this big investment in the separate dwelling, as you're calling it, the in-law suite. And it just seems to me now the question is, now what do they do with that? And it seems very limiting to me to say that they can't have someone else in the, take on the unit.
Can I?
No,
And I just would be interested, again, I'm trying to make sure I'm clear on what is the actual, do we have a lot of that going on? What's the problem we're trying to solve by adding that language?
I guess the problem of trying to add, or the solution of adding that language is to kind of reemphasize that when you go through this process of getting this special permit, you take this special permit itself, that approved decision, you need to record that with your deed. You have to go through the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds as any other special permit received by a regulatory board. So your house is deed restricted to that in-law suite. So if you go to sell your home and someone is, hey, we got a 2-family, that's in violation, that's incorrect. It specifically calls it out as an in-law suite and not a 2-family dwelling. In situations like you describe, in terms of, a family member passes away or moves on and you have that unit existing, unfortunately, that's how this bylaw is set up, is that is predominantly for an in-law suite. That is to meet the criteria of this. If you were to rent that out, it would technically be done illegally.
So do we see a lot of that?
Yeah, we do but we get a lot, not many of them, but once, again, it's a morbid thing, but once your parents pass away, you're basically left with a mini apartment. And unfortunately, that's the part of the special permit you're asking for, to be allowed to bring in this extra kitchenette. And your option is either remove it if you want to keep it, or you can have your kids come back from college, they can have their own privacy. But we don't see much. What we do see is when houses are sold on, after a period of time, being advertised as an in-law or an apartment that can make money for the owner.
I gotcha.
And that's what's happening is, that's what we're trying to stop, is you buy a house in a single family district, that's what you wanted, and most in-laws are in single family, and all of a sudden you're beside a 2-family house that's been rented out to whoever you want to rent it out to, and neighbours are going, well, this is not what I bought in this neighbourhood for. So that's why we're trying to get as much verbiage that says it is an in-law, you're asking a special permit for an in-law for your parents. Again, with the morbid thing of saying they're eventually going to unfortunately pass away and you're going to be left with virtually a mini apartment. They can still use in family, or again, if you remove the kitchen altogether, then you have a full house again, just without the extra kitchen area.
Can I make a comment on that, Mr. Chair? I do think it's a partially a political question, is what do we want these neighborhoods to look like? Do we want an in-law suite to be for your mother-in-law or your aging relatives or a disabled relative or somebody who needs that spot who is of blood relation, which is actually specified as a requirement? Or do we want sort of a back door for, our zoning residential neighborhoods where a 1-family is allowed, where somebody builds an in-law, sells it, the new owners say, well, now I have 2 separate entrances and I'm going to rent this out as an Airbnb, or maybe that's not a big threat, but I'm going to rent it out to somebody who's going to give me $2,000 a month, and now we have a 2-family house in a 1-family house neighborhood. And I do see that potentially snowballing. If we don't mind people being able to do whatever they want, then I guess that's okay, but we have zoning for a reason, because there are neighborhoods that don't allow 2-family houses, and I don't know that we want to open up, a can of worms where all of a sudden, these in-laws become something other than what they were intended. So I do think the language clarifies that, and we have to ask ourselves, do we want to protect ourselves against sort of the unknowns of what it could turn to be? So I just want to make that comment.
Any other comments on that? Okay.
Moving into requirements, so this is where the bulk of many of the suggestions come from in terms of proposed changes. The first one being a look at the minimum and maximum size of the unit. So you notice that the minimum size requirement has been suggested to be increased from 250 to 350 square feet. The minimum reduced from 1,000 square feet to 850 square feet. And then a point of clarity to remove building size and have the square foot or 33% of the total habitable space within the principal unit, a principal dwelling, whichever is less. So kind of explain this a little bit better to just read out in its clarity. The accessory in-law suite shall be a minimum of 350 square feet and no larger than 850 square feet, or 33% of the total habitable space within the principal dwelling, whichever is less. That item is also marked with an asterisk, and I can go through that as well. That's a provision of the requirements section where items marked with an asterisk can be altered as a condition of the special permit. So while both the existing language of this section of the bylaw and proposed language change slightly, there is still the provision that if a situation arises where someone needs to exceed the size requirements, they are eligible to apply under that asterisk, so to speak, that alteration as a condition of that special permit. Some of the reasoning between reducing, I know that's kind of probably might be a clarity of why reduced from 1,000 to 850. That really just arose from a discussion of pre-existing history that the board has seen in terms of comparable in-law suites. Look, it's really kind of hard to find what's a true number which makes sense if you're going to define it. But often that 850 number was probably more in line with what previous case history was seen, whereas the 1,000 square foot number seemed to be extensive. The one thing with the whole language of this bylaw is, and you could go through the idea of, what am I looking at, a 4,000 square foot house or a 1,000 square foot house? The language of, providing the max and minimum or 33% of the habitable space within the principal dwelling unit, whichever is less, there's that threshold where if you do have in a larger principal dwelling unit, or larger primary dwelling unit, that 33% cap may be exceeding 850 square feet, or in the previous case may have been exceeding 1,000 square feet. In that situation, the maximum threshold that's defined would be the number that you would go with if you had a larger primary dwelling unit. That being said, that is still a requirement that you're able to alter as a condition of a special permit. So while the language changes, that relief is still an option for certain situations, and an applicant can certainly apply under that.
So this is the one that actually caught my eye.
Yeah.
This is one that caused me to start wondering why we were doing this.
Yep.
Because I sit there and think it feels very arbitrary. 1,000 feels arbitrary, 850 feels arbitrary. They all feel arbitrary.
Yeah.
There's no science behind what it should it be this or should it be that. And so if it's been 1,000 and it's been 250 as the minimum for some period of time, I don't know what period of time it's been, but for some period of time, unless there's some problem, and again, that's why I keep coming back to what's the problem we're trying to solve. If there's a problem that is occurring as a result of the 1,000 and the 250, that's what I'd really like to understand before I could agree to the 850 and the 350.
I could jump in there,
Yeah.
unless you have something to say, but I think this is where you and I will agree, Mr. Chairman. And I agree, if anything, we should be going in the other direction. If anything, 1,000 should turn into 1,100, but I would not want to be, I think there's two categories of changes that I'm seeing from you, and one is clarity, which is important, to be more clear and concise in our language and know what we're trying to accomplish. And then there's also the category of more restrictive, and I think this falls to the, nothing is being made more clear, we're just being more restrictive, arbitrarily so potentially, and I don't want to take somebody's right to make a reasonable change to their home away and say, now you're capped at 850 square feet. I just think it's more restrictive in an unnecessary way. So again, if anything, I would go in the other direction, but certainly I would, this is the one that caught my eye also. And if I was going to make one change in this entire document, it would be to make no change on this particular requirement. So.
Other comments? Ben?
Maybe you said this in your answer already, Pat. If so, I apologize. But what is the difference between the total building size and the total habitable space?
So habitable space, we actually have defined within our zoning bylaws. It's primarily the livable space within the dwelling unit, excluding things such as garages, or excluding utility closets, decks of that nature. So when we had building size there, it kind of put it in an area where, well, you're looking at the gross floor area of the dwelling unit, or are you looking at the habitable space?
Okay.
So I think ideally, looking at the habitable space makes more sense in terms of proposing a max and a min, because now you have, well, you don't live in your garage, you don't live on your deck, you live on what would be defined as habitable space.
Right.
So that's kind of where adding that language helped to kind of clarify how the measurements should be taken.
Interesting, okay. I think another way to look at it, or another way maybe to talk about it other than what we've said so far, is putting in language under like Section 8 for the purpose, or even under ownership requirements, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. Those aren't necessarily binding. So you wouldn't know if somebody's in-law or parent passed away if they were then renting it. And certainly I know that Mr. Crowley asserted that, well, if somebody then puts it up for sale and says they have a two-family, then that's where we would step in, and rightfully so. So really where that comes to bear in terms of, are we trying to make it easier for people to have in-law suites, or are we trying to make it harder for people to have in-law suites? Where that really comes to bear is right here under requirements, because that's the square footage, right? So if somebody says, well, my mother-in-law or my uncle or whomever is going to live in a space that's 350 square feet, maybe they're not willing to do that, maybe it's too small, maybe they want something that's more like 1,000. To me, this is actually going in the other direction and saying that we're going to further constrain people. People are not going to want to build in-law suites. I feel like we should be going in the other direction. And this is a little bit of what Glenn was maybe alluding to, is I think we should be making it easier for people to put in in-law suites, because there's a huge demand for that, right? And certainly with the aging population of Walpole, and we've heard a lot through the master planning process, and even before that, about people who want to stay in Walpole, their families in Walpole, and they maybe don't want to stay in their homes any longer, but they do have family, and that's the exact type of scenario that we want to encourage, or I guess I should say that I would like to encourage, and that we've heard a lot of positive feedback for. So I would agree with Glenn, I'd agree with Jim. I think we want to keep those numbers as flexible as possible and as desirable as possible. So certainly moving them down is not something I would be in favor of.
Okay.
Simply because I think it constricts what people are able to do. And it really, when you couple constricting size with all this other serious sounding language about no circumstances and things, I think it's going to scare people off. And I really don't want to do that. So we can keep going.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Any other comments on this part?
I would just say I agree. I would not like to see us make it more restrictive on the square footage size for in-laws.
Thanks, Ally. Okay, Patrick.
The next requirement that has been altered is requirement D4, dealing with exterior landings. So in this situation, I guess you're going back to some of the same discussion we are now. You're further restricting in the sense, whereas the existing language, there shall be no more than 2 exterior landings which may be covered and not exceed 50 square feet in area. You've gone back to, the suggestion was to go to 1 exterior landing. And the reason being is really to just retain the character of an existing single-family home. And so the logic is, if you have an interior access and you have 1 exterior access, does that help really define it more as an in-law suite? Whereas that second exterior access, are you opening up the possibility of where that could be utilized as a rentable unit? So reducing it to 1, from 2 to 1, to me, or I guess, didn't seem as too sizable of a loss, because you do have you still have 2 means of accessing that unit, both within the primary dwelling unit, but also just maintaining that one exterior landing. So I don't know if there's similar kind of
Well,
concerns of that.
again, the thing that I
Yep.
come back to on this one is, whether it's 2 or 1, the wording could still work, where modifications are made to any entrance that 1 or 2. What the one appears to be the entrance of the principal dwelling, the others appear to be secondary entrances. So I get the philosophy that's afoot here, is trying to make it look, like it's a single-family house. But I'm not sure limiting from the landings from 2 to 1 is the way to do that. It seems though you could still have the 2, but also say, but it also they have to look like secondary entrances, right? So again, I'm just always concerned when I see us starting to limit things.
Okay.
Like this, and wondering, what the law of unintended consequence is going to be, and we're gonna figure out, 3 years from now and say we shouldn't have done that. Other thoughts?
I agree with your comments.
Yeah, I would just point out, it's somewhat, ridiculous, and I'm not impugning you, Patrick, or Mr. Crowley at all, we're just having a discussion about this, but the result shall be that one appears to be the entrance, and the other appears or does not appear. And I mean, like, what kind of language? I mean, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, I don't even know how we could expect our building department to judge something like that. I mean, we're putting them in a tough spot with language like that, so that's all, Jim, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yep. Okay, Patrick, let's keep moving.
Yep.
And I want to try to step us up a little, because I know we're
Yes.
chewing up a lot of time here, more than we had planned. So maybe what you could do is just hit things quickly that you think might be, where there's been a lot of discussion on it. Let's see if the board has any questions on them, okay?
Okay. Number 8, we basically clarified that shall be 1 water meter at the home, not excluding irrigation metering. That currently was left of an asterisk because it was flexible, but further clarification and talking to the engineer, town engineer, it really kind of solidified that 1 meter per dwelling unit is more how it should be, rather than leaving it up to 2. So we just clarified that language there. 9, dealing with no lodgers.
So let me just hit that, see if the board has any questions on it. So again, this one feels a little bit like overkill. It makes it clear, no more than 1 water meter shall be allowed. That's the existing language for the entire dwelling. I see the addition of the external meter, which I think is valuable, because you might want to separate internal use from external use for billing purposes, right? And then, are utilities mentioned at all in the current bylaw?
No, so that language was added as well in terms of
And so I don't
clarity.
see any real problem with that, but I don't know, I guess I don't have a real problem with this, because it's more clarifying it, but I guess I don't have a problem with it. Anybody have any issues with this language? Okay, let's keep going.
The next one has to do with no lodgers within the principal dwelling unit or the accessory in-law suite, and neither unit shall be used for business, commercial, and seasonal rentals.
I didn't have any issues with that. Any concerns by the board? No. Okay, let's keep going.
9, further clarified parking. So all parking for the accessory in-law suite shall be contained on site and compliant with the applicable sections of the bylaw. In the event of insufficient space within the existing driveway, appropriate space for at least 1 parking space shall be constructed on site to serve the accessory unit and constructed of materials consistent of the existing driveway.
It seemed reasonable to me.
I think that's a good change.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
that's really reasonable, particularly when we're talking about adding housing
Actually
downtown.
makes it easier.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
11, so this one is entirely new. There should be no more than 2 bedrooms within the accessory in-law suite.
I have no issue with that. Anybody? Okay, let's keep going.
And then 12, unrestricted passage shall be maintained between the accessory in-law suite and the principal dwelling unit to assure that the accessory in-law suite is accessory and subordinate to the principal dwelling unit and not an independent dwelling unit.
Concerns on that for anybody?
I mean, I don't know if is it clear? Is it making it more clear? What is unrestricted passage? Is it a door? Is it no door? Is it a door with no lock?
A door with no lock.
Okay.
This is unrestricted.
Okay.
Because the main reason behind that was the zoning board always enforced a cased opening, so you could freely move from one to the other. So again, you're dictating what the interior of a single-family home really is, which kind of violates mass general law. So we said an unrestricted passage, which means they can use a door, they can use a cased opening, they can put a larger hallway, they can change what passageway from one, so you get your privacy of your in-law to your family. But without the lock, it means you can move freely through it.
And without this language, an in-law suite could only have access from the outside potentially.
Exactly.
And this is allowing or requiring access from the inside
Yeah.
with a door.
So Glenn, to speak to that, not to speak to Jim, but prior, going back to Jack Me, the building commissioners have had an issue with this. This is something that was required by the ZBA, but not in Mass General Law, right, Jim?
Yeah.
So there's a conflict. I have always had a problem that the ZBA made residents go above and beyond what was required. I think if the feedback I'm getting from the select board tonight is, I'd like to see a couple of these things tweaked. I'd like to work with Jim on this one, if you want to kick this one around a little bit further, to make sure that it goes along with what Mass General Law does, not above and beyond, which is what this current language proposes, right, Jim?
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds like it makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's keep on going.
And then the final changes would be within section 14, which is the definition section of the zoning bylaw. Accessory in-law suite is defined in 2 locations. A little overkill, but it's not entirely uncommon. So it's defined within the bylaw itself as well as the definition. So the definition section of the zoning bylaws. So that's the definition you see there. Habitable space is an existing definition. The language of finished heated living space was included within that, just to, again, add more clarity to what that is. And then third degree of kinship is not identified, and that's kind of a kind of sticking point of the in-law suite. So that's why that was added to the definition section.
Okay, questions on that for Patrick? Okay, so I think you've heard the feedback from the board. I like the idea of having you take this back with Jim,
Okay.
rework it a bit. I like the thought of not going beyond Massachusetts general laws
Of course.
and making sure that we're not overkilling these things. The message I think you're hearing from the select board is that, you know, we should be looking to make this easier, not harder. And so as you're thinking this through, let's put that kind of a lens on it and just make sure we're not making things harder. And I think you heard rather firmly about the 1,850 and the 350, the 250 to 350. That's not something that the board likes. So
Okay.
I'd give you that as feedback. Did I miss anything, board members? No? Okay. All right, good. So is there a need for us to take any action on this
No,
tonight
so
beyond
the
that?
sense I'm getting from the board is, obviously, we're closing the warrant tonight.
Yep.
We'll include this as part of the warrant, if you're okay with it. Obviously, we'll take about a month or so plus probably to have council. I have to go through, we have, what, 31 articles with this one?
This will be 31.
32? 31 articles with this. So it'll take me a little while to work with Laura and go through everything, but probably come back in February with a solid draft for you guys to sign and review each one. So make sure you're comfortable with it at the time.
Good, okay, sounds good. All right, on to the final leg of this journey. So we have the wayfinding and branding program and grant. And Patrick, you're going to take us through this as well.
Yep, I'll try to be as concise as possible.
Thank you.
Essentially, we received a grant through the Mass Downtown Initiative for technical assistance with wayfinding and branding. As part of that, it's a 5 to 6 month process. You work with a professional consultant who's designated by DHCD. Our consultant is Mark Favorman of Favorman Designs. Throughout this process, we'll be able to the way it kind of goes is you essentially created an advisory committee who will be able to meet at least monthly with the consultant as the consultant reviews town history, town character. Usually they kind of rely on this advisory committee for local knowledge and feedback. Throughout the process, we will walk away with 3 different design patterns, a hierarchy of wayfinding elements, which has to do mostly with signage and different interpretive signage, and then you walk away with cost estimates. So I know this is a project that was discussed in terms of ARPA funding, and this is a project that it really has its roots in the fact that it's been mentioned in 3 different downtown economic development studies within the past 8 years. So it's a good project in terms of like instantly noticeable. It's relatively affordable, and so this consultant will at least give us kind of like the framework and the guidance of here's some proposals of what it can actually look like, which adheres to the town's character and adheres to kind of like local knowledge and feedback, and then most important thing, price estimates and where to actually get this fabricated. So one of the elements, like I mentioned, is the advisory committee, and put this forward to the board for discussion tonight. The recommendation is really based upon my conversations with the consultant and how they've dealt with this in previous towns. I recommended an advisory committee made of about 7 to 13 members, and I provided kind of a list of like where those members could potentially come by. So now I don't know if that's something the board would probably want to think about at a later date or make a vote on it now. That's entirely up to you.
So you've got, I think, 11 in the memo, right?
Yes.
Do I have that right? And is that your recommendation, that we go to 11? 11 feels a little unwieldy to me.
It's a little wieldy. That's why I
Yeah.
recommended 7 to 13. And in terms of looking at those 11 myself would be, the ex officio in terms of setting up the meetings and leading the meetings from the town standpoint. The other 10 recommendations, I really put forward to the board in terms of just from discussion with the consultant of what typically towns have offered as composition in the past.
Let me open up to the board for questions to Patrick on this one.
I had
Yep.
for me, I think a board of 7 is more reasonable.
Okay.
I think there's too much discussion, and then progress is hard to make. Looking down this list, I would say some of them are either or. If you're, cultural council or one from historic commission, I don't feel like recreation department necessarily is one
Okay.
as needed. One community member, and instead of a business owner, since the Economic Development Commission is listed, just that, so remove the business owner, and get that down to 7.
Okay.
So do you want to take it back and give that some thought and then bring it back to us, or is there a need for us to actually vote this tonight?
I think you want to get working.
I do want to get working on it, just
So you're
to,
comfortable with 9, right, Pat?
I'm comfortable with 9, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay with that?
With those edits that Ally just
Okay.
made? Yeah.
Removing those.
Yep, I'd like to see it down to 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Seven.
say-
7,
Yeah,
yeah.
7.
Yeah.
So I think that's just, cultural council or historical commission. I don't feel there's necessary to have both. And
And
that's
take the
gonna
business owner off.
Take the
take
business
the business
off,
owner off and
take rec off.
take rec off, and then knock it down to 1 citizen.
So 1, 2.
I mean, historic commission, depending on how the wayfinding goes, I'm somewhat leaning more towards that. I know some towns really kind of look at the historical point of view of the town when creating the signage.
That's typically, so historical commission member, from just reviewing the different projects through MDI that I've gone through, that's usually someone that's pretty consistently.
Yeah, and you won't be limited in commissioning feedback from any groups that you want, just because they're not on the advisory committee.
No.
7 sounds good to me.
So you go with 7?
So is that removing cultural council?
Yeah, so it's cultural council or historical commission.
Okay.
It's removal of the number 3 business owner, the number 7 rec committee, and it's taking the number 10 from 3 to 1.
Okay.
And that should add up to 7, okay?
Works for me.
Okay, Ally, could I have a motion, please?
A motion to approve the charge of the Wayfinding and Branding Advisory Committee
Second.
as, should we put,
Yeah.
as suggested by the select board.
Second?
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. Hey, before we go on, let's go back on the last one. Do we actually need to take a vote on sponsoring the prior article?
I
think I would
Yeah, I think we do
prefer
too.
that, just to-
Yeah, okay. So let's go back on that one if we could, Ally.
Motion to sponsor accessory in-law suite zoning bylaw amendment and add to the spring 2023 town meeting warrant.
Seconded.
And I would just say that with that means we have the pen, right? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. Okay,
Can I just-
Thanks,
sorry,
Patrick.
Can I just get one more motion? Can we just reference that it's going to be a 7-member committee as suggested?
Do you want me to read them out or just put
No,
as
just
suggested?
something
Okay.
as spoken in the meeting or something like that. That should be fine. Thank you.
Okay, so motion to appoint Wayfinding and Branding Committee with 7 members as recommended by the select board.
Perfect, thank you.
Second.
all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. All right, Patrick, thank you. Appreciate the discussion.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so that brings us to open forum. Anybody who would like to speak at open forum, please come right up to the mic. just tell us who you are and
Yeah, absolutely.
what's on your mind, okay? Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
My name's Mary McDougall, and I'm with the Waste Reduction Committee. That's the new name. It used to be called the Recycling Committee for the town. And specifically, there's a smaller group within that group, and it's the Food Waste Group. And I'm here with fellow volunteers, so I've got Donna here as well as Nancy, and we've been working pretty hard on this. This is a fast-growing initiative across almost all towns, I have to say, across Massachusetts. So Walpole wants to, we want to be part of this. So a couple of things, quick things to tell you, and we have flyers for you too that Donna has to summarize everything. But there's a talk on January 12th, this coming Thursday, at 7 o'clock at the library that I'll be speaking and giving the highlights of what is it all about and what are the options for people living in Walpole. It's sponsored by the Friends of Walpole Public Library, the Walpole Green, and the Walpole Waste Reduction Committee. And then a couple of other items on our flyer just lets you know that a company called Black Earth, which is a curbside pickup company for food waste, will be coming to Walpole. They're taking enrollments. And I just wanted to say, too, that they have set themselves up in 80 other Massachusetts towns. So we're excited that they're including us now. So we're getting information on that out to people. But we're also emphasizing that people have choices. If they're interested in food waste composting, that they also can pick up compost bins here at the town for a reduced rate of $25 as opposed to the $61 value. So all of that is summarized here, and I know I only have a few minutes, so I wanted to be succinct, and everything that I just said is on our flyer. So if you have questions, by all means.
May I
Well-
make one addition? You could actually look at this as an article to help the town save money on trash.
Yes.
It's about 20% of your trash is.
Could you, yeah, I think what you're saying is important. Could you just come up and come to the mic and say it? It's just so the people that are at home, no, it's the people that are at home that can't hear you. Okay.
Audience. Yes, so you might look at this as a way to save the town money on its trash pickup, which is huge, costly, creates hothouse gases wherever it ends up getting burned. Your banana peels, your chicken bones, your leftover pizza crusts, all goes into this curbside bin. We look at this as kind of getting on the bandwagon, so we're not running behind the bandwagon. It's going to be a state mandated thing within a period of years, so we can get ahead of it. And I don't know if you've seen the articles in Hometown Weekly, but they've been in pretty substantially for thank you to them last 6 months. And we're really looking forward to that. We've been at several events in the area, e-recycles. We're getting a reasonably good response, and that's about it.
I think so, yeah. It's, what Donna said is so true. Food waste is very heavy. And the thing is, if it goes with our trash out to the incinerators, it's just creating more and more hothouse gas. We don't even have landfills anymore. We just only have the incinerator sources. So it's something that individuals can do. Thanks.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Climate change.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Mr. J. Mrs. K. Thank you so much. You're very welcome.
Thank you for coming to Open Forum. Appreciate it. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at Open Forum? Okay, being none, let's move on to new business. So, Jim, we've got a bid contract.
Sure. Bid number 23-06, the cleaning and redevelopment of the gravel-packed wells. It's a reoccurring invitation for bid that comes up every year. It's in the water budget under professional services. Scott Gustafson, the superintendent, along with Rick Mattson, the DPW director, reviewed the bids and made a recommendation to award the redevelopment of the gravel-packed wells to Dennis L. Marr Company, based in Sterling.
Questions for Jim? Ally?
Motion to award bid contract 2023-06, cleaning and redevelopment of gravel pack wells to Dennis Mayer Company.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. 500. All right, next up, we have discussion of the FY24 town budget, and what we're looking to do here is have Jim take us through the thinking that's been going on within the budget over the last several months as they've been pulling it together. This is, of course, in preparation for Jim's budget message, which is by charter due in the weeks ahead. And so we'll be stepping through that tonight to get a sense for where we are with the budget and the direction we're going in. So, Jimmy, let me turn it over to you.
Sure. So just kind of a brief overview of where I'm at with the budget. Obviously, I've been working closely with Finance Director Jody Cuneo Town appraiser Dennis Fliss, finance and treasurer collector Lisa Sakis. As it stands now, the budget's currently balanced. There are a few items that I have not set a figure on, which I anticipate I probably won't have a final figure in once the budget message is set for delivery on February 6th, just because the way things always work out. Those two items include health insurance, which I won't receive numbers on until mid-February, and the state budget figures, which usually comes out at the end of, January, but with the new governor, I don't expect that until sometime, probably in February-ish. So we're gonna make some assumptions. Basically, what I did is bumped up state aid by a small amount, $100,000. So some major items of note in the budget include no new positions in any departments at this time. New growth budgeted for $650,000 compared to $1.1 million that is in the current year's budget. This figure is based upon the town appraiser Dennis Flish's recommendation. Dennis specified that his new growth isn't based on historical data or trends. It's estimated based on the current projects that are under development and future projects that are set to come on as of June 30th, 2023. Over the last 5 years, new growth is centered on some large projects, such as the project at 95 West Street, which is 192 units, 1034 East Street, 156 units, the large condo complexes, Pennington Place, 186, Brookside Village, 30 units, Siemens expansion project, commercial projects such as the 2 hotels on Route 1, the self-storage building out on Route 1, and some of the business and personal property, which has grown by about 65%, that's accounted for in new growth there. So bottom line is Dennis is comfortable with 650 at this time. We just don't have the large building projects coming on by that specified time frame. We do have other projects in the pipeline, but the foundation for the Summer Street project isn't going to get started until April, and that's just one building. It's going to take some time to ramp all of that up. So police budget's set to increase right now by just 0.79%. Fire department's budget just increased by 1.61. As it stands now, I have Walpole Public Schools budgeted at an increase of $1.67 million, which represents a 3.24% increase. Currently, I have $500,000 budgeted for the capital stabilization account. In this current budget, we budgeted $341,000 for that. One item the town needs to be very mindful of is the Tri-County School Building, which is currently at a $280 million budget. The Select Board's set to receive a formal update next week from the Tri-County Superintendent regarding that project, but that's not going to impact our FY24 or likely even 25 budget. But $280 million, I'm guessing the state will pick up 30-40% of that, but then the other 11 member communities, if it passes, will have to come up with the balance of that. That's something over the next few years. If it passes, I will continue to remind the board that we have to come up with a funding source for that. So that's kind of a 10,000-foot view of the budget. I'd like some input from the board. I've met with some of you one-on-one. Each of you have received the budget. Some of the major department heads are here tonight. I see Rick out there, Chief Kelleher, the school. I see the school is well represented out there. So they're aware of the numbers. I've gone over the budgets as they stand now with each of them. So I'll take any questions you may have.
So I guess I'll start. So first of all, I want to tell you, I think we're off to a good start on the budget process. And I say we're off to a good start because, as you all know, this is the beginning of the process, not the end. We have months ahead of us to work through the FinCom process and so forth, leading into the Springtown meeting. So there's much work to be done. The charter requires that Jim provide us with a balanced budget, which he has done. And so thank you, Jim. That was important to get to that point. But we also know it's a lean budget. You know, there are assumptions that are in this budget that are different and lower than other budgets in the recent past. And as a result, we're seeing much smaller increases, as Jim has just alluded to, in terms of the percentage increases across many of the departments. I know, Bridget, you and the school committee are still working through the budget. I'm aware that there is a gap between, you know, what is your likely ask and what we've got currently, you know, lined up in this budget. Again, we'll continue to work this process going forward. This is, again, the beginning, not the end. So more work to be done there. I think one of the challenges that we've got, and there are many, but one of the challenges that we do have is how we're thinking about things like that capital stabilization line. And I think it's important that we be putting money into that capital stabilization line because it'll support project work going forward over the years ahead that we would not otherwise be able to do. That said, it is a drain against other budgets and something that we need to be having, priority discussions about. And I know the school department and Bridget, you're leading a lot of that. So again, more work to be done there. Jim alluded to the health rates. Frequently those come in different than what we thought they were going to be. We'll see how they come in this year, and there may be some help there. And who knows what will happen through some of the other budget processes the state is working towards. So there are some moving parts here. But what's important is that we as a select board are providing Jim with input on the process to date, that we're helping him get to a balanced budget, which he's done, and that select board priorities are represented, which is what we'll talk through here tonight. So some of what I would say is we've had a lot of discussions with the various department heads and with Jim. Glenn and I met with the fire chief the other day, and we talked through one of the issues that the fire chief has around an EMS coordinator, somebody who keeps track of the billing, the invoicing, the certifications of the ambulances, the training of the people that run the ambulances, and so forth. And if you'll recall, back in the summertime, we had discussion in one of these meetings where we had a gap that arose in the billing process that was partly due to the company that we were that does our external billing, but it was also some process issues that we've got. And the fact that we don't have a full-time EMS coordinator. The ambulance is a major source of revenue for the town, and the money goes into the ambulance fund to be used to pay for ambulances and other stuff. And so I think it is a reasonable case to be made that we need to have a full-time EMS coordinator. I don't know if you've had further conversations with Tim on that, but it's something that, as again, we don't have to decide it tonight, but as we work through the process, I think it's something that we need to be looking hard at, because I think it could close down a gap for us.
Sure. We have talked briefly about it. He's explained what specifically he's looking for. I got to work on a job description and kind of tightening that up a little bit. And I want to put together some type of a salary survey so I know, he said it's a range of 80 to 100. I budgeted worst case, but how can, maybe I could back into that three-quarters of the year if I know more about it. So.
And my thinking is that we'd be taking those funds from the ambulance fund itself. So that's not then draining it away from other budgets. It's from the ambulance fund, although it would take down the revenue side a little bit on the ambulance fund. But that seems like something we should be looking hard at. So those are some of the thoughts I have. I have a few others, but I think before I go through those, let me open it up to the rest of the board for further discussion and feedback. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, Ben?
I don't, I know that Jim had alluded to sitting down and talking through items, and I'm thankful that Jim kind of has an open door policy when it comes to that stuff. So we've really gone through a lot of the minutia that's in here currently in the budget, this draft balanced budget. So I don't have anything specific to add to what you said, Jim, but I think that I generally agree with all the information that you just put out there, and I think we have some additional discussions to take place.
Okay.
Sure, at the risk of only highlighting a couple things, I think you did a good job of just sort of spotting in each category. But the Capital Stabilization Fund comes to mind, which you already mentioned, and I basically agree with your comments that it is sort of a drain on some of the other budgets, but it allows us to do bigger and better things down the road. And so $500,000, am I correct that, so 341 was last year, and how many years have we been funding, the current year, how many years have we been funding? It's relatively new as far as a budget item, right?
Is it this year, or is this the second, is this the first or the second year, Jody? This is our second.
Yeah, so, to that point, it's a relatively new budget item, but it is gonna bring us a long way toward some of our bigger priorities, whether it's a high school renovation or whatever our capital needs might be, that free cash and borrowing can't necessarily handle. So the Capital Stabilization Fund is an important component that is creating some other challenges. And then just briefly on the EMS coordinator, I just want to clarify that that's not going to be a drain, which you already said as well, but it's not going to be a drain on the other budgets because we're looking at the ambulance fund as the source of revenue. So that's all.
Thanks, Glenn. Ally?
I also had the opportunity to meet with Jim and talk through many of these items, and most of the things that I had concerns we've kind of touch point on. I am concerned about the fire personnel. We've made a lot of progress of getting our fire department up to what would like to be fully staffed. But historically, things have happened where there's injuries or retirement, so to not add any positions, I think the EMS and going about that route is a good way to solve that in some ways, and using the ambulance funds. There was some discussion too with the police budget, because of right now with no new personnel. And I think we had kind of talked about the cruisers and where that used to be part of the capital budget, replacement cruisers, and now is part of our operating budget. So I'd like to further have more discussions on that. Tri-County is very concerning to me as we move forward in years to come, and how that will impact us and where we can find the revenue to cover that. And then school budget, it's always a big one, and there's a lot more discussion. I'm sure that takes a while to really finalize.
Thank you, Ally. Mark?
Yeah, so, one of the things that's always hard every year in the budget for Jim to do and the board to talk about is, sources of revenue. So we're estimating what we think revenue can be in the next fiscal year. And we're also estimating some of the big costs like health insurance. So my perspective is I'd like to see more money flow down into the budget after sort of the non-discretionary costs, and look at maybe tightening up a little bit on healthcare costs. Take another look at revenue sources, motor vehicles. And I understand the new growth issue, but I am surprised that's a low number this year. And I'd like to see what state revenue looks like. I also think that the capital stabilization money of $500,000, we should consider putting that in play into the operating budget, because we are taking it out of the operating budget. And we do have the ability to fund capital stabilization through capital. So again, I know we're early in the process, but those are just the things that I'm thinking of, is get more money to flow into the budgets. I understand you've put together a tight budget. We're not adding any new positions, police, fire, DPW. But I'd really like to see us consider if we could get more money to drop down into the budget, continuing to make some progress with, police, fire, DPW, some of the things we know we need. So again, I know it's tight, and hopefully next year, as those construction projects gear up, and licenses and fees starts to increase again, and new growth increases again, that we'll have a little bit more in play. But that's sort of what I'm thinking right now is, it's a tight budget. I think we're going to have better revenue coming up in the next few years, but I'd hate to lose progress on some of the things we've been working hard on, so. And again, I think you've done a great job getting the budget to where we are now, that we can consider what options we may have, so.
Okay, keep plugging away.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think you take the feedback from the board, go and press on both the revenue and the expense side. The danger on the revenue side is you don't want to be overly aggressive there, because the very worst thing we want to have happen is have the actuals come in underneath what we've projected and used to develop the budget. We can't find ourselves in that spot. And so, from where I sit, I'm looking at that 650 new growth, and it does feel low to me. But at the same time, I feel like I have to, put, my trust in Dennis Fliss, who's our assessor and who does this for a living. And I would want to be careful that we don't push too hard, and maybe there's some ability to push it up a little bit, but I want to be very careful that we don't find ourselves in a spot where we're short on revenue, because that'll be a disaster.
Can I ask a question on the new growth estimates
Sure.
for Jim Johnson? So you said that if any project isn't estimated to be in place, permits and occupancy by June 30th, 2023. But what about projects that are partially in place?
So he's able to go back, like Pulte is a great example, because they phased that in over four different buildings over multiple years. So he hasn't captured all 4 buildings a few years. In his notes here, building number 4, 36 units left. He's maybe he's gone forward and captured the foundation of that last building, but we don't have the full occupancy, so he doesn't have the full building there. So he's been very tactical, the way we've captured the new growth.
So
over there.
January 2024, if we have a reasonable expectation that a project would come online, do we not factor that in to the new growth estimate?
A year from now?
A year from now?
Oh, yeah, we'll factor that in.
So you had said June 30th of 2023 was the deadline for.
That has to be on the books. That's how we could go back and capture it. Because he does it all throughout the month of August and September.
Yeah.
Just as Jody's balancing, getting the free cash together. It's from the previous fiscal year.
Okay.
So a year from now, yeah, I think there'll be other projects. I mean, while you were talking, Renmark came to mind. That's 106 units that they're finally getting underway up there. It's been years and years in the works because they've been mining up there.
Okay.
So.
Hey, the other thing I had meant to mention, but I didn't, is, the $500,000 for capital stabilization is an interesting one, because we've been having some discussions with the schools about what we're trying to do over at the high school. So it's one of those things of, it does have a big impact on the schools either way. Like, if we fund capital stabilization, there's more potential for the high school, but it may be at the expense of the current year for schools. So that's one of those things that would be nice to hear the schools weigh in on some of that discussion in a month or 7 weeks, whenever, as we move through the process. Like, what are they thinking? So, and I know that you have an opinion, and the board has an opinion, but.
And what we generally do is we get together with the school leadership, myself, Bridget, Jody, Mike, and, before I finalize everything, we try to be on the same page as much as possible. So I anticipate over the next 3 weeks, we'll have those meetings, and if they push harder on this one, I'll come to the board and say, listen, they asked for 50,000 or 100,000. I think it's, it's important to them. I think we should offer it up out of capital stabilization. But that's a discussion we have to have, so.
And I think we have a good process. I mean, the school's finalizing their budget, where you've come up with a budget, and now there needs to be a lot of talking to talk about priorities and how do we move this over here or move that over here. So, I think from a budgetary process, for people watching at home, I think we're doing everything the right way at the right time, and we do have time to work through those issues. So I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, as I said, we're at the beginning of the process, not the end. So there's months of work to be done here. And again, I'm aware that we've got a gap between what the schools are thinking about and what's in the current budget Jim has. We have to work through that. With that said, I don't want to get into a big, long conversation on it, but since Bridget, I know you're here, the school committee members are here, is there anything that you guys would like to talk to at this point, where, given the discussion tonight, and it's fine if the answer is no, but I just feel I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to.
Don't feel like you have to. You don't feel like you have to.
We didn't prepare anything, but
No, and that's fine. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and if you don't want to talk, don't talk. You were good enough to be here tonight. I thought I should offer you the opportunity.
we appreciate
Okay.
that. I think, for me, I'm just trying to understand, we spoke with you guys, I think it was around December 1st, and now we're here, but I don't know, I don't exactly think we know how to proceed, because when we were together in December, we talked about a potential high school project, and we pretty much came to the conclusion that we can't afford to do what we would like to do. And now we have this budget gap. And I think that the operating budget is really important to us. So if we fund capital stabilization, if we fund capital stabilization and push a high school project down the road, we may never be able to afford it, because it gets expensive as you push it down the road. So I am trying to figure out whether we should just push for our operating budget because the needs of the schools are not going to be met through that capital stabilization. I guess that's one of my concerns. I think that COVID's been hard on everybody, but I think we're just beginning to see how it's impacting school students. Like, it's our special ed budget that we're most concerned about, and of course, those kids are the kids we're very concerned about. So I'm not so sure we're going to have the control over our budget next year and the year after that we would like to say we could try to have. We're not adding positions either, but, or at least we're not talking about that at this point. If we do, we're reallocating. But we do have increased costs because of the needs of the kids. So, I think we just need a little bit of information about how valuable this capital stabilization is going to be to the schools, or if we're going to be left, in a bind of we can't afford it today, but we can't afford it 3 years from now or 5 years from now, because then we should just put all our energy into getting what we can from the operating budget. So
Yeah.
that's one of my questions.
So I give you two thoughts, Jim, you can add to this, but one is, you've got to decide what your priorities are.
Right.
Okay, is it the operating budget, or is it, doing some directed work at the high school, right? The capital stabilization, there's no magic here. It's simply putting money away in anticipation of a project that would happen over some period of time. It's what we do in our own personal lives. We save money to go and do whatever it is we're going to go and want to do. And that's really the point behind capital stabilization. But in order to do a high school project of any size, that requires you have a fair amount that you put into capital stabilization, which is where the 500,000 is coming from. So I think the questions that you got to wrestle with here are a couple things. Number one, operating versus, the project, the high school project, and what's more important today. That's number one. Number two, when you think about the high school project, are there ways that you can get there that aren't doing the whole thing at once, but chunks over time, which of course makes it easier to fund those activities. I for one would be happy to sit down and work you through the mechanics. We can't do that right here, nor do we want to. But I think it's a question of getting your minds wrapped around your priorities and what's the thing that you want to focus on for the FY24 budget. And then let's work through it, because we can move things around. As I said, we're in the early parts of the process here. We can do some things, but we're kind of reacting to the fact that you're trying to do this high school thing, while also having the operating budget. And what Jim's done is try to strike that balance, which I think he's done a good job on. But it does mean that you had to take some away from here to put over there.
Right.
Jim, what would you add to that?
And I think it would be beneficial I know we've gone over it with, there was 30-something people in the room, Nancy. I think, and Mike and Bridget and I have gone through it. Maybe the chair and you and Glenn and Jim sit down in my office, and we literally, because I've found it really beneficial with the department heads, pulling it up on my screen, showing them my formulas that I use for the different, police budget or something like that. I was able to show Chief Keller today, okay, these three positions, one was 53, and 27. Here's where I came up with your number. It was easy for him to digest it because it was just right in front of him. So I think if we had that meeting, and I just pulled up the debt calculator. So what we still have in there is, right this year, going into FY24, I have the 500,000 budgeted. With that 500,000, and I know it was a bit confusing in that meeting in November, December, but we still have a good balance at the bottom. It's balanced. It's not a negative balance at the bottom there. So we can talk through that in my office, and I can literally take you and Mike and everyone, whomever else, through the formula as it goes. And that's one of the things I wanted to get out here tonight and talk, because ultimately, if we don't go forward with that 500,000, it's going to delay the project. I think Mike and I joked, every year we wait, the cost goes up. And before Brian left Compass, he said, you push this off a year or so, the percentage is going to go up because your interest rates continue to rise, but the cost of construction, no matter if it's good, a down economy and an up economy, it never goes backwards, it always goes up. So if we take that 500, we're delaying it, God knows how many years. So,
And the other thing that I want to, and Bridget, please come up while you're doing that. The other thing, Mark hit on, the Tri-County question, and we'll be hearing more about that in the weeks ahead. But that is also a wild card in this whole discussion. And we need to see how that plays out before we can really make too many decisions down this path anyway. And again, we'll hear more about that in the weeks ahead. But I'm sorry, Bridget, go ahead.
No, Nancy pretty much said it all, so thanks, Nancy. But just a couple of quick things that it is when looking at, our budget and you look at this, gap and thinking, what are these people asking for? You look at that gap, but it's not. It's no new positions. Well, it's two, but we're going to, work on reallocating them in their special education program positions. But it's special ed, and as Nancy mentioned, when you're coming out of COVID, this is what we're seeing, and that's something as we go through that will explain the what, the why, and the how, and also when we go to Finance Committee in the end of February, beginning of March, to really see why those gaps exist. If we had a crystal ball, our hope is that and when you're talking about capital stabilization, hoping that this might be a 1 or 2 year problem, but we don't know, unfortunately. So it's finding that balance of taking a look at capitalization, taking a look at our operating budget, but also trying to be fiscally responsible of, so we're not penned in and having to do layoffs.
Right.
So it is, and I'm glad, Jim, that you said, this is the beginning of the discussion, and I'm glad that we're doing it now. And, Mike and I have been working with Jim, and, we have a workshop next week that we're meeting with to really talk about it. We're working with our leadership council and just really trying to take a look at, what we can give, and then really trying to meet in the middle.
Perfect.
Can I make a comment, Jim?
Sure, go ahead, Glenn.
So I just want to just make the comment that I do think that the $500,000 in capital stabilization is the ticket to the high school renovation on the timeline that's been laid out. And could that 500 be 450 or 400? Yes. And so that's okay if if the school board and the school committee decides that they want to maybe put that renovation on hold. And there's a chance that it could still happen. But I do think that when we put $500,000 aside, we're kind of almost assuring that it's on the path to being a high school renovation that you're asking for, which I support. But also I would support you if you said, no, our operating budget is more important and we need to take some of that back, recognizing that a delay is if not possible, likely on the high school renovation. So but I'm trying to strike a note of optimism that the way that it's set up now is we're on a path toward doing what we want to do on the capital front. I just don't know what the risk is to you on the operating side, and I would yield to your. I would defer to you and your recommendation. If you wanted to pull some of that back, I would think that would delay the high school renovation, but that might be what we want to do. So.
Thanks, Glenn.
Sure.
Any other comments from the board? Okay, thank you, Bridget.
Chief and Rick were there. I don't know.
Okay.
I think that's where this.
So I know that the chief is out there, the police chief's out there, and Rick is there. I don't know if the fire chief is here,
No.
but Rick or Rich Keller, do you guys want to say anything about your budgets?
I have nothing at this time.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Chief?
No, I don't see either. I spoke with Jim earlier today. We talked about some of the issues. I know how you mentioned the cruiser issue with the capital we kind of discussed, so I have nothing further to discuss at this point.
Great, okay.
I see Jim about it and we're on the same page right now.
Thanks, Chief.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so Jim, do you need a vote from us?
No, I got some comments from each of you, I think, that I wrote down, and I'm just going to continue to work through it this month, and one way or another, we'll deliver a budget message on February 6th
Yeah.
with the balanced budget.
Well, I think we're in a good spot to do it, too. I mean, the things that we have to talk about, we need to talk about, but they're well understood things that we need to talk about and land.
Yeah.
So I don't think it won't interfere with you being able to do that. And I think you've done a really nice job of running the process and putting us in the spot where we are right now, where we know we have a balanced budget. Now it's just a question of, are there ways to move the pieces around a little bit to meet what other objectives we're trying to get to?
Thank you.
Okay?
Agreed.
All right, so let's move on. Thank you all for being here tonight to support that discussion. It was very, very helpful, so thank you. Let's move on to the next one, which is a vote to close the 2023 Spring Town Meeting warrant. Is there anything that we've talked about today that gets in the way of that?
No, so what we have, on the, just, I don't have it in front of me, but off the top of my head, I know we have six articles relating to the six downside contracts that are up to be expired. We have the budget, we have 4 articles related to sewer and water, simply relating to their in-year budget and their fiscal '24 budget. We have, is it 8 zoning articles?
8 plus the one tonight
So
will be
9 zoning articles.
Okay.
8 of them will be sponsored by the planning board.
2 assessors.
2 assessors to reduce some of the taxes on some of the residents who may need it, which is a good thing.
1 citizen's petition.
1 citizen's petition for Eastland Circle to have that paved through a betterment, which we haven't done, but that, I think the citizen who's sponsoring it, she's great to work with, and we can work through it for sure.
Liz's article.
Oh, and Liz's article to clarify typos and throughout the budget, so throughout the charter or bylaws. So it's not that much. 31's a lot compared to what we've done recently, but there's not a, I think we can get through it.
Good.
No problem.
Okay. Any questions for Jim on the warrant?
So what we'll do now is, over the next month or two, work with town council to review the different articles. There are a couple I may want to bring forward at the next few meetings as far as surplus properties potentially to present to the board, to talk you folks through it. I'll probably bring it forward just initially for discussion next week, and then probably in February have you discuss it even further.
Okay, great, thanks. Ally?
Motion to close the 2023 Spring Town Meeting warrant.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500.
Jim, could I just make one request as everyone's schedule for FinCom Planning Board comes about, that we get copied of those of when they're going to be voting on certain things?
Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah.
I just feel like sometimes as we get to those final votes, knowing when Planning Board, and that we hopefully can collaborate a little more, especially on those zoning articles.
Okay, no problem. I'll work with Patrick on it.
Do we have either of the candidates in tonight?
No, so Natalia, you have met, I think
Yeah.
the board has met her twice
Yeah.
at this point, and then Patricia Fisher is the town nurse, so
Yeah, no,
I figured everybody
Knows
knew
her.
these people at this point.
Good, all right. Ally?
Motion to appoint Natalia Orlando and Patricia Fisher as an associate member of Historical Commission.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. Ally, let's keep on going with the HESCO request.
Motion to approve request of HESCO for McMorgan's 5K road race on Saturday, March 11th, 2023, beginning at 9 a.m. with the same route as previous years.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 500. And the next one, Ally?
Motion to approve request of Frank Musher for a one-day all-alcoholic beverage license on January 21st, 2023, from 6 to 10 p.m. at 137 Stone Street.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. 500. Onto the consent agenda.
Motion to accept with gratitude the following donations: Bear Family Trust to COA Gifts, Philip Sanford to COA Gifts, Scott Andrew Catchwell to Ambulance Gift Fund, New Pond Village Association and Riverwalk Condo Association to Library Gifts, Allied Recycling Center Incorporated to Track Improvements.
Seconded with gratitude.
And on that last one, the Allied Recycling Center, I just want to say that's $100,000, which is a very, very generous contribution. Jim, do you want to say anything
Sure.
about that?
They've been great over the last few years. Not to say they haven't been great in the past, but Mike Schaber, who runs that operation down there now, he reached out to me. They helped out last year at the end of the year with the we're calling it the Rebels Den. They sponsored that for $100,000. They reached out again, wanted to do another donation, so this one's going to go towards the high school track, which is set to be renovated this spring, so this summer. So we're going to put up a plaque for them and recognize them once it's done. I think they've been great, so just much appreciated.
Awesome. Okay,
Jim, is it Timberwolves Den?
Wolves Den?
Wolves Den.
Wolves Den?
Wolves Den.
Okay.
You should know that, Pat. I thought of the name.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. And the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes of December 6th and 20th, 2022, as presented in our packet.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
500. Jim, Town Administrator's Report.
Sure. Oh, not too much to go over. Just briefly, we talked about the budget warrant and the budget message. As I said, February 6th, we'll have that wrapped up. But select board goals and objectives. So you may recall, back in the late fall, I think the select board set your goals and objectives for the next year. Jim and I met last week to kind of go over and get a status update. Probably in February, I'd like to give, maybe have it on as an agenda item and just quickly run through, here's the 10 or 15 things, here's the status update, here's where we're at with the ARPA projects, you know, Timberwolves Den. That's completed, those 750's expended on that one. June Street, here's where we're at with that. So I'd like to do that in February with the board, just to give you a rundown, since, you know, it's been a couple months. And just Martin Luther King Day on Monday, Town Hall closed, and that's it, so, thank you.
Great. Questions for Jim?
I just had two quick follow-ups, and not to put you on the spot here, but just two things that we had talked about in the past. Where is the Gilmore's project at currently? And it's not
Actually, we're doing a site walk tomorrow with the state at 10 o'clock out there.
Okay. And then I guess what is the next step then? So it's a site walk, so their application's been accepted, so you have your site walk. And then
I assume usually what happens is they ask a town to participate in the site walk. 30 days go by, they issue their letter of eligibility.
Right.
And then they, shortly thereafter, they file for the comprehensive permit.
ZBA.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And then we had talked, and I know this is maybe falls more under the goals and objectives, which we're going to talk about anyway next month, which is fine. But following up with the MBTA, we talked about a little bit tonight with the whole station and moving and all that, and maybe that's something we could talk about in February.
Actually, Glenn and I have a meeting, is it the 19th?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah, with Jody, who met with us, and I think, was this
Adam.
Adam? Yeah, who kind of set up the meeting, so that's happening later on this month.
Excellent.
Yeah, we are on the, Walpole is a priority for capital improvements. Nothing is guaranteed, but they are considering us.
They mentioned that. They mentioned that when they were here.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Anything else for Jim? Yeah, Mark?
Hey, the other thing is, you know, we had a good discussion about the high school project, you know, a month or so, 6 weeks ago, whenever it was. We should probably schedule some time to, you know, redo that discussion or add on to that discussion at some point, you know, end of January, early February, just to sort of keep it alive. I mean, it seemed like we finished that meeting knowing it's something we want to do, but we weren't sure of the finances. At least that's my perspective of it. I think it would be good to revisit that again and keep it in the discussion mode and figure out, you know, are we pushing for the whole project? Are we going to break it up into chunks? You know, just, it seems like a question to me, so.
Okay. I think they were they set to discuss that with the school committee, the architect?
Yeah, so it's about mid-December, the school committee, you know. Yeah, so I know that the architect met with the school committee, I think mid-December, I think it was at the December 15th meeting, where they were asked to vote the priorities. So I know that there was those 6 priorities that were presented and discussed at that meeting on November 28th. So I know that as far as, you know, a statement of what the school committee's values are, what the school committee's priorities are, I think they voted at that December 15th meeting to proceed with those 6 options. So it essentially gave TAPE Architects, Chris Blesson from TAPE, his marching orders as far as what to proceed with in schematic design. But I know that there were some questions about financing and how to get there, but as far as what TAPE is working towards schematic design, he's got his marching orders.
So I think what we could do is probably have it more, maybe towards that second meeting in February, the first meeting in March, and maybe we'll have TAPE in, or have some more refined figures from TAPE or something more from them. I'll be able to probably just put it up on the screen and we can run through here's where we're at. Because one of the things I didn't do so well at that meeting was talk a little bit about the bottom line and this capital stabilization fund and how that will affect the areas where it's actually in red for the surplus or the deficit, and how we're going to make up that deficit. So we could talk through that.
And I think it's good for, I mean, the school committee sort of knows what they want the building to be. But, you know, the discussion a month or so ago was good because FinCom was there as well as us. So all 3 groups have to sort of be in sync if we're going to move ahead with any kind of a project. So I just don't want to lose that. We all came together, we talked about a bunch of things. I want to make sure we can get back together at some point and continue that discussion. So
To
glad the schools are sort of.
And to add on to that, you know, as we discussed, the planning, what are the priorities, what should we look towards building? And it, very much balances with what can we actually afford. So I think that both questions need to be answered, but if we're really moving forward with design plans and things like that, but it's not based on kind of a valid budget yet.
But what we had asked Chris and Tape to make sure that they design those 6 items, design them in an order where, we can't do the items 5 and 6, chop it off, or maybe just items 1 through 3 we could do and phase in the other one. So they are designing it to that point, in that manner.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks, Pat.
Anything else for Jim? Okay, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
5-0-0. We're now adjourned. Good night, everyone. Patrick from Walpole Media, thank you for your help tonight. Good night.